folks, so you're stuck with me for 5 minutes here. We'll be loading up that beautiful Ice Explorer in just a few moments. That is the much cooler looking vehicles than the one that we're on right now. Now, before we go any further though, there is just one thing I would like to acknowledge, and that is this beautiful land that we're on. So this land has actually been occupied by the beautiful people of Treaty 6, 7, and 8 Indigenous peoples, as well as Métis District 4. Now, as Athabasca Métis, it is incredibly important for me to honor these people, as well as share some of their stories that they have deeply rooted with this land. So we'll jump into the first and most recent one here. That took place in 2019. Now, back in 2019, the Stoney Nakoda people came to the Athabasca Glacier. They actually held a ceremony. That ceremony is called a peace pipe ceremony. That's where two groups come together and they rejoice in the peace and prosperity between the two of them, as well as create new memories for the future. Now, this was very cool, and we were very honored to be a part of this. And in doing so, when we were with them, the elder by the name of Barry Wesley actually gifted us the indigenous name for the Athabasca Glacier. That is Chahatunga. The Chahatunga roughly translates into where the ice lays, and big ice. Now it really lives up to that beautiful name, because the Athabasca Glacier is actually one of the largest glaciers to come off the Columbia icefield here. Now you may have noticed we have some interesting weather here. It changes every 15 minutes. Now, earlier this week it was snowing, now it's sunny, and now it's going to rain, all that good crazy stuff. Now one weather event that you can guarantee to feel out there is a weather event called katabatic winds. Now these winds form when the hot air from the valley here rises on up and collides with the very cold winds coming off the glacier. Now this creates a wind called katabatic winds, and these go up to 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour. Now, these crazy winds not only will mess up your hairstyles while you're out there, folks, they also affect the land that we're on. Now, all over on our left-hand side, you're going to see some trees that look quite interesting. Now, these trees are what we refer to as flag trees, because they kind of look like flags blowing in the wind. And they form from these katabatic winds whipping through the valley here, ripping off their branches, helping them with debris. And they've adapted to grow their branches downwind. Believe it or not, the first tourists actually would have seen these trees much alike. Now these trees are about 700 years old, and they take a very, very long time to grow actually. So the original tourists that came here upon horseback all the way from Lake Louise and made the treacherous journey that took them about 2 to 3 weeks to complete would have seen them very much the same. Now we've traded in the horses for our horsepower here, folks, if you will. Now it only takes about 2 to 3 hours to complete this journey. You'll be going on to our one-of-a-kind, beautiful Ice Explorers. Now these vehicles were specially designed for us just here at the Athabasca Glacier and Columbia Icefield. There's only 23 of these in existence, so you're in for a real one-of-a-kind treat. Now, I do have to coordinate with your driver, so just give us a second. I just ask that you remain seated for that portion of this tour. I also will ask that you bring everything with you that you brought onto the bus. The likelihood of me being your driver on the way back is pretty slim. Please take everything with you so you have it with you as you exit the vehicle. Now folks, enjoy your tour out there and have a lovely time out on the Athabasca Glacier. You're in for a real treat today.
Now, take a look at all the buses around us. Of course, every little bus that we have, a little different, a little more important, a little bit of personality to it. You might notice that around us, there's no other buses that look quite like this one. Folks, take a look. I'll be with you very shortly. Alrighty, now that we are on our way, welcome aboard again, everyone. Welcome to the Columbia Icefield. More specifically, welcome to the Athabasca Glacier Tour. So the biggest misconception about this tour is we're not walking on the ice field itself. We are walking on its second largest outlet glacier. That means it is a glacier connected to the Columbia Icefield. We're not actually up and on the Columbia Icefield. Trust me, today, folks, you want to be down here and in the valley and not up there where you can see those clouds rolling in. It is more comfortable down where we're going to be on the Athabasca Glacier. But now as we make our way forward, you can see the hill in front of us is the start of our off-roading journey. Now the bus that you're in right now, we call an Ice Explorer. Like I said, purpose-built for this tour, has a couple of fun little features to help us safely and effectively drive through the mountains and the ice up here. So I'm going to stop around right here, put the bus into neutral, like that, and switch on a little switch. Now, I'm going to have you guess what I just switched on. I'll give you a bit of a hint though. Yeah, if you have a F-150, or if you've got a Jeep and you do some off-roading, well, you're probably going to switch this on to give you a little bit more traction, a bit more power off the road. Folks, what did I just turn on?
4x4.
4x4 would be the answer I'm looking for, but it's not actually the right answer. Folks, how many wheels do we have on this bus? Six wheel drive, absolutely. So to get us up this hill, I'm in a low gear, but I've got to punch pedal to the metal, folks. Ready to see what this has got?
Let's go.
Yeah? All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, go! And that's it, folks. That's it. As we get up and on the hill, you'll actually feel us slow down ever so slightly. That, what you're feeling right now, is only about a 250 horsepower engine running a 27-ton bus. And that's without all 54 of you on this bus. So that is a lot of weight and a lot of power required to pull this massive chunk of metal up and down against the forces of gravity. So we don't have a lot of speed. All of our power is in our gear ratio. What's that mean? We have incredible torque. What does that mean? We're not losing traction, folks. That's what this bus is built to do, is to stay stable, steady, not sliding, but we're not going very fast. That is the trade-off. Today we'll be going anywhere between, right now is probably the slowest we'll be going, around 7 kilometers an hour. We're still flying, folks, as the slowest bus goes about 4 or 5 up this part of the road. So hey, could be a lot worse. But we'll be going maybe about as fast as 15, 16 kilometers an hour on some of the downhill parts. So you'll get to see how it feels to go a bit faster than this, but not much faster, as this is a leisurely stroll through the mountains today, folks. That's the way to do it. These buses are rated for 34K, but hey, that's about 4 times the speed we're going right now. I think this is plenty fast enough.
Yeah.
Now, this bus that you're in, I've called an Ice Explorer. I kind of lied to you when I called it an Ice Explorer. I know, right off the bat, great first impression. These buses are not called Ice Explorers. They're not called snow coaches, which you may have heard some of the people that work in the tourism industry around here for a while. They call these buses snow coaches. That was our old name for it. We now call them Ice Explorers. And before all of that, the company that built this bus names this bus the Terra Bus. T-E-R-R-A, Terra Bus. Not Terror Bus, but Terra Bus. And in the world, Foremost, which is the company, has only ever built 23 Terra buses. Now you may be able to see, especially once we get around the corner, see how many buses we have driving around, plus the ones down there in our lot. We've got quite a handful of these Ice Explorers, quite a handful of those Terra buses. Does anyone know, out of the 23 buses ever built, how many we have in our fleet?
16.
A little more than 16. 21? Now you're 21?
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Winner, winner. 21, folks. That is the correct answer. As out of the 23 Terra buses ever built, we have 21 in our fleet. That means that there are only 2 other buses in the entire world that are not here at the Columbia Icefield. Out of those 2 buses, one of them's in a museum, so it's not even functioning, and the other one is in Antarctica right now, at an Australian research center. So unless you're doing research for the Australian government, you can't ride that bus. This is the only place in the world you can drive in a Terra bus, folks. And it has been for the better part of the last 50 years. As the reason why we have so many is because this bus was built for this tour. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we were driving that little yellow bus you might have saw with the treads on the side, down by the Discovery Center, up and onto the ice, when the ice was right next to the road. Now, as you can see, folks, the ice is about 3 kilometers away from the road. That is a very big difference. But even way back in the 70s, we noticed this was going to be a problem we were going to have to figure out. Those little buses were not able to drive on this rocky terrain. So in 1979, we went to the Foremost Company, here in Alberta, actually, in Calgary is where they're based. And we said, hey, Foremost, can you solve a problem for us? We need a coach bus fleet that can drive from the side of the road up and onto the glacier. And they said, wow, that's a really big request, but sure, we'll figure that out. And between the years of 1979 and 1981, the Foremost Company researched, developed, and came up with the Terrabus for us, for me, for me to drive today, right now. And that is why we have so many, as they were built for us. Just so happens 2 other companies through those last 50 years got a little jealous and ordered their own bus. But we have pretty much all of the functioning ice explorers in the world right here today. And you just so happen to be in one of the original buses, folks, as we are in a bus that was built in 1998 and has yet to be refurbished on the interior. So this brown and khaki color, these big switches and everything, this is all original from the 90s, from the factory, when they built these buses. Now, we have not had another bus built for us since 98. All of our buses that look newer are just refurbished buses from the beginning of that line. So most of them are actually our oldest buses that look the most brand new. Now, I could go on and on about these buses, folks. As you can tell, I'm a little passionate about the buses. It is pretty fun driving one of these things every day. And if you want any questions, folks, I have an answer. Come find me when we're down on the ice. I have yet to be stumped by a question about these buses. That is your challenge. Try and ask me a question you don't think I know. But as we are getting up into the side of the valley, folks, we're going to put this bus to the test a little bit. As this in front of us is pushing the steepness grade for this bus right up to the limit. So, where we're driving right now is called the lateral moraine. If you look to the right side of the bus, you'll see an exact copy of this big pile of rock all the way on the other side of the valley. These big piles of rock, these walls, if you will, plowed into place 14,000 years ago as the glacier was forming in the valley. Now, the last glacial apex, the last time the glacier actually grew, was in the 1840s. Ever since then, the ice has been receding to where we see now, leaving behind a shell of the size it once was. This pile on our side, that pile on that side, was the border of each side of the glacier in the 1840s, 180 years ago. Now we're going to drive down the side of the lateral moraine right now. This is considered one of the steepest unpaved commercial roads in all of North America. So much so that if you are to see a warning for a steep road out there on the roads in Canada, one of those signs, it's warning of a 6 to 10% road grade. This is a 30% road grade, folks. 3 times steeper than anything you could drive with your car here in Canada. But don't you worry, like I said, this is a purpose-built machine. It's going to do no problem. I can't talk through the most of this part, so if you have any questions, just wait till we get to the bottom. As we pick up a bit of speed, you'll feel a bit of a jolting motion. That is our transmission lockup. It's keeping us safe. I'll throw a thumbs up like that so you know that's supposed to happen, folks. Now, I can't talk from here on, so enjoy. You'll hear from me shortly. Just like that, folks, we made it to the bottom. Great job, everybody. You've now just driven down one of the steepest unpaved commercial roads in all of North America. Now, you know what that means. We can pick up a little bit of speed now, folks. We can go a little faster as we have now descended off of the lateral moraine. Again, the big piles of rock plowed into place the last time the glacier was growing in the 1840s. Now, lateral moraine is just a very, very fancy term for long ways pile of rock and dirt. That's all it means. Lateral, right? Long ways. As you can see, that is a very good descriptor of that pile. And then moraine just means pile of rock and dirt. And if you look around us, you'll see there's piles of rock and dirt all around us in this valley, almost as common as the glacier ice itself, as moraines are an incredibly common feature of the glaciated landscape. Now, there's only two that we're going to talk about today. The lateral moraine we just drove down, showing off the size of the last glacial apex, and the one we're driving on right now, called the ice core moraine. Now, the ice core moraine, other than being just sort of a feature of the landscape, actually has a bit of a functional purpose for the glacier. It helps the glacier in a very interesting way. For those of you on the right side of the bus, take a look down and into the bottom of the valley at the very last pile of rock. You'll see that that last pile of rock is slowly being washed away, and underneath, there's something shining through. Don't quite say it yet, folks. For those of us on the left side, same thing is happening. This pile of rock to our left is starting to wash away, and you'll notice it's not a pile of rock, but rather a layer of rock on top of something dense underneath. Folks, all together now, what do you see under the rocks? Ice. Glacier ice, folks. That's right. So on this side of the valley, we're not looking at a bunch of piles of rock. We are actually looking at a half-meter thick blanket, if you will, on top of the glacier ice on this side of the valley. So for those of you that have yet to be on a glacier, welcome, folks. We're on it right now. It just doesn't quite feel like it because of this ice core moraine. Now, you can look at this ice core moraine as a thermal barrier, if you will, insulating the ice underneath, keeping it the size we see to our left there, as that is not piles of rock. That's actually the elevation of the glacier ice, as it has maintained its size thanks to the protection from the ice core moraine, especially compared to the right side. You can see just how dramatic that difference is. Now, there's a bit of a one-way section to our road up here, so I'm going to stop, let my friend in the bus in front of us go through first. As soon as they make their way through, some of us might be able to see the water up there. Trust me, you'll see it soon. We are driving through it. Once they are through that water, we'll follow right after and go past them. But if you're looking at the left side of the bus right now, folks, this is a great example of what the glacier is going to look like in the last 2 to 5 years of its lifespan. What does that mean? Well, all of the visible ice around us will melt first, as the ice core moraine means the ice underneath is the best protected ice. It'll be the longest lasting ice in this valley. So when all of that visual ice disappears, the only thing left of the glacier will exist underneath these piles you see around you. So the left side will be what the Athabasca Glacier looks like in the last couple of years of its life. As we get closer and closer to the water up here, you'll notice that water rushing through and exposing the ice underneath the rock. That'll be the only evidence that there is a glacier in this valley after all this visible ice has deteriorated. So the left side of the bus, not only is it neat to think that that is all big chunk of ice underneath that rock, but it's also a future, or look into the future of what the glacier will look like at the end of its life. Now here comes that water I was talking about, folks, a little pool that we actually purposely dam up to pool up on this part of our road. The reason why we do that is this is called our tire wash, folks. And yeah, fully hands-free car wash out here on the glacier. I didn't think you'd see that. And it is here to wash our tires. That is the purpose of this body of water. That's why we dam it up. That's why we want it to pool in this area. Now you'll notice I'm driving real slow. That is because this is a low wake zone, folks. I'm not allowed to make big waves. And you'll see just how destructive the water can be. If you're looking on the left side of the bus right now at that mill well, that's what a mill well is, folks. A massive hole that the water is digging itself into the glacier. You can imagine these as big ice tubes. They are pumping ice water, out the bottom of the glacier. And this water digs those paths on its own. That is how powerful water is on the glacier. You think sunlight or heat melts the ice the fastest, but no, it's the water that melts the ice the fastest. So driving nice and slow through there is to make sure that we don't destroy the ice around it any faster than the water already would. But also, like I said, the tire wash. It is washing our tires, and I'm trying to make sure they are thoroughly clean as we are now driving on the glacier ice. Now, the reason why I don't want to have dirty tires on the glacier ice is I don't want to make the glacier dirty. The reason for that is that the dirtier the ice, the faster it melts. If you look on either side of the road, you'll notice on the snowbanks where that accumulation of dust, dirt, debris is where the snow is melting faster. Now, the reason for that is because of the dark color. If you could imagine standing out here in this hot summer's day with a black t-shirt on, your friends in a white t-shirt, you spend 5 minutes in the exact same sunlight, you'll be heating up much faster in that dark colored shirt. All the ice around us that's covered in dirt, well, that is wearing the black t-shirt, folks. That is soaking up that heat, that sunlight, therefore melting the ice faster. Now, what we're looking at on the sides of the road is a naturally occurring process here on the glacier. If you look at the right side especially, you'll see these stripes as they run through the snowbank. Well, what we're looking at is the layers of snow and dust and snow that have fallen on the glacier throughout the winter. So we'll get massive amounts of snowfall out here, and then that snow will stop, and the wind will blow the dust from the mountains on top of that snow. And then the snow will go on the dust, and dust on the snow, and it goes over and over and over again, making all these layers that we can see right now. Now, with the melt season being what it is right now, we are looking at that snow melting, but the dirt doesn't melt away. So all it can do is slowly accumulate. Those layers come together, and they make these big clumps, melting the glacier faster in that area. So that is a natural process. We can't do much about it, but what we can do is not add to that natural process. So we have a low-tech solution, which is our tire wash. Now that brings us right to the start of our platform here, folks. Before we get out and to the ice today, I do want to remind you all, we are in the center of a glacier. To get this far out onto the ice, normally you would need thousands of dollars in safety equipment and years of training and specialized information to be able to keep yourself safe this deep into the ice. Lucky for you today, folks, this tour don't need any of that preparation. That's the great part about this tour, is you can just come and walk on the ice in a place that you would normally need a lot of training and equipment for. The reason why I want to remind you that is that we have an area that is corded out for us to walk on purpose. As we make sure that this area is the safest place to walk, we do sonar scans, 3 different safety checks every morning, and periodic safety checks through the day. We are monitoring every movement, every piece of ice out here on our walking area, so that we know there are no hazards for you to worry about. Now, the 2 major hazards on the ice, the things that we are looking for out here, are crevasses and mill wells. So that mill well we saw an example of. Mill wells have openings all over the surface of the glacier. You can imagine these as enclosed water slides that have these massive tubes that crisscross through the center of the glacier. Those openings are all around, and there's rushing water going into those openings. So you slip near a mill well, the water takes you to the center of the glacier every time. Now, the other major hazards are crevasses, the big cracks in the ice. They're caused by the movements of the glacier as this big chunk of ice moves about 3 centimeters into the valley every single day. So all that pressure means part of the ice that wants to move and the other part that wants to stay builds pressure until bam, it snaps and cracks all the way to the bottom. What's the bottom? That's 400 feet down, folks, 150 meters deep. That is how thick the glacier is in this area, meaning any crevasse in this area would go 150 meters, 400 feet, all the way down to the bedrock. So those are the 2 things we're checking for out here, and those are the 2 hazards that are right on the outside of our boundary signs, folks. I know for a fact that directly to your right, my left, out that side, is one of the biggest crevasses that is very easily accessible in this entire park. How do I know that? The Parks Canada does crevasse rescue training in that crevasse over there. It is such a big crack in the ice. So do not pass those red signs you see all the way around, as they are letting you know. On the inside, don't gotta worry about that. On the outside, you would probably very much have to worry about that. Now on this side of the platform, our signs stop over there, a couple of signs in. That is because our buses park in a diagonal line. What we ask from you is to not pass the front axles of any of these buses. You get into the blind spots of the bus. A 27-ton bus trying to do a 3-point turn, you don't want to get behind that bus. You don't want to get in the blind spot. So stay in front of the front axles inside the red boundary signs. While you're walking around out there, make sure that you're watching your step around the yellow signs. The yellow signs are marking deep puddles. So if you step too close to the yellow sign, you might sink into the ice, into the water, into the slush a little bit further than you want to and soak your ankle, folks, okay? So just stay clear of those yellow signs and within the red boundary signs. Now on a day like today where it is pretty wet, watch out for the blue ice. The blue ice is the straight up glacier ice, and that is the more slippery ice. So walking around, try to stick to the more white or gray churned up ice as you're walking. But of course, folks, just watch your step, all right? Feel how it feels. Keep your center of gravity as center as possible, and make your way up to the top of the platform where it is easiest to walk. Now looking at the time right now, it is currently 1:57. I'll round that up to 2, and giving us 20 minutes means that we'll be back leaving at 2:20. At 2:15, I'll give you a 5-minute warning, letting you know we're leaving in 5 minutes, which is just bus 540, the Elk bus, 5 minutes. Just make your way back when you hear that 5-minute mark. We'll leave at 2:20. You can follow me off the bus now, folks. You can leave anything you like on the bus, and you can get back on before that time if you would like.
Because I don't want to get it.
All right. Follow me.
I mean, get out for a minute. That's it.
No, we can leave up front.
Welcome to the glacier. Thank you.
Only for a minute.
Well, stand up over here, I'll get a
To
picture of
get
you.
a couple pictures, that's it.
There we are. Now this part of the road right here, folks, we'll test our seatbelts a little bit, as it is pretty bumpy, especially on a warm day like today. All the water rushes down this specific part of the ice, creating all of these little valleys that we were driving over, these rivers. We'll go nice and slow, but again, bumpy tires, folks. Or sorry, bouncy tires. That's not too bad today. Yeah, all things considered, I spoke too soon. That wasn't too bad at all. We are now on our way back down the ice road, folks. And now that we're headed back down, let's get into that story I wanted to talk about. So, way back in 1970s, 1974, 1975, 4 friends from Oxford University made their way all the way out here to Jasper Park. The reason being is that one of those 4 people, a guy by the name of Robert Sanford, was obsessed with glaciers. Glaciology, glacier adventures. He wanted very badly to go to the place where all the glaciers were, and the Icefield Parkway, still even back then in the 70s, was famous for being an accessible avenue to the glaciers in Jasper. So his 4 friends, or himself and his 3 friends, made their way all the way out here with the intention of going up and onto the Columbia ice field. Now you may have remembered, the Columbia ice field is 165 square kilometers of ice. That is 64 square miles of pure glacier ice. So you can imagine that is definitely not the right place to go if you have limited experience on the ice, which is what these 4 friends had. They had a lot of knowledge, they read a lot about it, but they weren't they didn't go on a lot of glaciers. So they picked sort of the hardest thing to do first. Making their way out here, they realized, okay, maybe that was a little bit too big, too quick, too fast. So they decided not to go on the Columbia ice field. Instead, they opted for the Saskatchewan Glacier. Now, the Saskatchewan Glacier is the largest glacier connected to the ice field. It's about 1/3 larger than the Athabasca, and because the Athabasca is the 2nd largest, they are sister glaciers. The Saskatchewan is actually about 2 kilometers straight through the mountains to our right, but it takes about an hour to get from the nearest road to get to the toe of the ice, so nowhere near as accessible as the Athabasca Glacier is. So those 4 friends, thinking they didn't need a guide, they didn't need help from anybody, they were just going to do it on their own, made their way out to that road, the nearest to the Saskatchewan Glacier, being an hour away. Walking an hour through the woods, they finally got to the bottom of the ice, where they got into a single file line. Now, that is the safest way to walk on the glacier. Keeps your weight nice and distributed, as well as walking across certain dangerous areas one at a time. It kept them safe as they walked up the side of the ice. And for most of the day on top of the glacier, they had a pretty uneventful, safe day. Now, having an uneventful day out here in the ice is very, very dangerous, because if you are not paying full attention at all times, folks, you are in just as much danger as you were at the beginning of the day as you are at the end of the day. But if you have a full day of nothing going wrong, well, it feels like you're a lot safer at the end of the day. So you're not as diligent. You do not do your safety checks as frequently, and you get a bit more complacent. So that is exactly what happened with these 4 friends as they were making their way down the glacier. They were hungry and they were tired, so they were going a little bit fast, a bit too fast, and they were not paying attention to the snow underneath their feet. Making their way down the side of the glacier, they ended up getting to a plateau where they crossed one at a time. Now, in that line of 4, Robert was the last one in the line. The first person in the line crossed first. Feeling that the snow was safe enough, they called for their next friend. Now, the next friend should have also been checking the snow, but they were not. And the third friend should have also been checking the snow, but they were not. So when it came down to Robert's turn, the last one in that line, and he stepped in the same foothole as his 3 friends before him, he fell straight through the snow. He fell so abruptly, his friends weren't even looking in his direction. They were still watching where they were walking. So they only heard him scream to turn and find no more Robert, but a massive opening to a mill well, as the snow had broken free and fallen into the ice. We call that a snow bridge, a false platform of snow that looks like the rest of the layers of ice on the glacier. It is invisible, camouflage, if you will. Testing our seatbelts. There's the head dance I was talking about. So after Robert had fallen into the ice, those 3 friends assumed that he had died as soon as he fell in, as that is pretty much every single situation. So those 3 friends made the hard decision to leave the ice right away. They made their way back down to the bottom of the glacier, back to their car, and all the way back to their camp at Lake Louise, where they told everybody that Robert had died on the glacier. Little did they know, folks, as they were walking off of that ice, Robert was still alive, just underneath their feet. He had survived that initial fall into the ice and now was being rocketed through these ice tubes under the glacier, the most terrifying enclosed water slides you could ever imagine. These tubes are made of dense, sharp glacial ice, filled over halfway with glacially cold, freezing water, and it is pitch black down there. You cannot see a thing. So for 30 seconds, Robert was flailing as he was being thrown through these tubes, trying to grab anything he could, trying to keep himself upright, his nose and mouth above that water line, while also protecting his head as it slammed against that ice over and over and over again. But after those 30 seconds, Robert realized the dire situation he was in, and that likely, the most likely situation would be coming very shortly. The inevitable would be happening whether he was struggling or not. So in an incredible feat of mental strength, Robert actually tried to close his eyes. He tried to slow his breathing. In that moment of chaos, he tried to bring some peace to himself as he's expecting to make that next step. But he saw a light appear in front of him. Now that all confirmed to him that that was exactly what has happened. So he focused in on that light, giving himself to it as it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it began to glow a brilliant emerald green. As soon as he recognized this, he was shot out the bottom of the glacier into a glacial lake like the one on the left side of the bus right now. Robert had fallen through the glacier and taken about a full minute to pinball through all these different tubes in the complete darkness and end up in the right one that just so happened to empty out like a drainage pipe at the bottom of the glacier. 1 in a million, he'd pick the right turn every single time. Now, he was out of the ice. He had survived the glacier, but he had yet to survive the ordeal. As he was now bloody and bruised, definitely concussed, had to pull himself out of that freezing cold water and make his way back up onto land. And in a surge of adrenaline, realizing he had survived the impossible, he tried to find the trailhead. So he started circling around the ice, and he actually ended up finding it. He was not that far away from it, but as soon as he started walking through that trail, well, the hypothermia started to kick in, the concussion started to kick in, the adrenaline started to wear off, and he was starting to pass out. Now, Robert does not remember much at all of that walk hour back through the woods. All he remembers is being in a truck with a stranger as he had finally made it to the road. Flash to that stranger's perspective coming around the corner. He sees a man shaking, shambling with his thumb out on the side of the road. He clearly sees a man in distress, and with no other option than to stop and check out, he came out to check on Rob. Rob could only say Lake Louise. Other than that, he was very, very incoherent. So the man knew he had to wrap him in a blanket, put him in the front of his truck, and drive him back to Lake Louise. And that is exactly what happened. That stranger brought Robert back to his camp. But by the time he got back, keeping with the theme of this story, his friends had already packed up and left. That means that when he got to the hospital in Banff, it was almost a month of recovery before anyone in Robert's life realized he was still alive. Now, you'd think he'd never touch ice again, folks, but Robert is a world-renowned glaciologist of all things, a glacier scientist. So as a young man, he almost died in the glacier and now spends the rest of his life protecting the ice. Now this... Sorry folks, I can't not do that. I have to respond. This is the steep part, so I can't talk for this part. Enjoy the last little bit of the Loud on the Rain, folks. You'll hear from me at the top. Just like that, folks, we're back to the top. You have made it. No one had to get out and push this time, which is great. Good luck pushing a 27-ton bus up that hill, folks. That is definitely a joke, I promise. Now you may notice there is a hook or a little outlet for a tow hook on the front of these buses. which I think is a hilariously ambitious addition to a bus this size. I'm not sure what could tow one of these things up that hill back there. Maybe another Ice Explorer. I'm lucky we've never had to try, and we never will. They have changed tires down there on the ice, folks. They'll just do it where they need to do it. They will not tow the buses back. But look at that, we're back on top of the lateral moraine. Over to the left side of us, you'll see that other lateral moraine. And 180 years ago, the ice you were just standing on was as high as we are in the valley right now, reaching all the way across to the top of that other lateral moraine. Meaning the glacier was 2 kilometers wide and roughly 320 meters at its deepest. Just so happens that 180 years later, folks, the glacier is exactly half that size. It is 1 kilometer at its widest and 150 meters at its deepest. Now also to our left is the beautiful Shunwakta Valley. That is the valley that the Icefield Parkway follows down. And if you were a keen eye, you might have been able to spot the Skywalk is actually down that valley, folks. So for those of you that might not know, just down that valley, about 10 minutes, is a platform that sits 280 meters above the valley floor below, above the Shunwakta. And you're looking all the way down that 280 meters through the glass floor beneath your feet. Now that is a semicircle glass platform, and that is just on the next part of most of our tour, I believe. The next part of your tour will involve a lot more of the plants and animals, of the wildlife in this area, as you are now getting down into the sub-alpine region in the valley. Where we are right now, folks, is the highest elevation zone in the Rockies. We are in the alpine region, and not a lot of things live up here. As you can see, there's not a lot of things to sustain life up here, but there is one really fun little rodent, little mammal, that does live up here in the tops of the mountains all year round. They live in the loose rock you can see around us right now, so keep your eyes out for any mice darting around between the rocks, as what you're probably seeing is the alpine pika. Now the alpine pika is a very cute little mouse, but it has a very thick fur coat. And in the summertime, like now, right now, it cannot shed that fur coat. So they will overheat if they stay in the same place for too long. So in the summertime, the pika will travel up the sides of the mountains, going as far up into the mountains as they need to chase that cold air to regulate their body temperature. Because of this behavior, we call them a signal species. So as this year we can see the pika, they went a little higher in the mountain than they did last year, then we're having a warmer summer than we did last year. Or they didn't have to go up as high in the mountains this year, while we're having a colder summer this winter. There are lots of signal species here in the park where their behaviors show us what exactly is happening to their environment. The alpine pika just happen to be one. They live up here in the mountains with us all year round. And one of the only little mice you might accidentally see at the top, the peaks of some of these mountains around us. Now folks, as you can see, that brings us to the end of our journey, or very shortly we'll be getting off the bus. Now before we get off the bus, I do want to talk a little bit about the Athabasca Glacier itself. Where is it headed? What does the future look like? What is the state of the ice? Well, the last 10 years have not been very good to the glacier. We've seen 5 to up about 7 meters of melt every single season. That means that within the last 10 years, we've seen minimum 15 meters of depth lost and maximum 70 meters of depth lost. So if you think about it, we've got 150 meters left of that glacier depth. Doing the math, you'll notice there's not that much time left. Now, if we were to see an incredible improvement overnight in our environment, a switch off of everything that we are doing to heat up the environment, we saw that cooling right away, it would still not be enough, as the Athabasca Glacier has passed the point of no return. It no longer has enough mass to effectively build glacial ice, so even in the best conditions, the glacier will still melt in the next 80 years. Now that is the best conditions, folks. As the most realistic on the path that we are on right now, the most realistic estimate is 30 to 40 years from now, which means that that glacier that has been in that valley for the last 14,000 years, you just happen to be on it within the last couple decades of its life. So those photos and videos that you have, folks, they'll be important very shortly, as they are evidence and tokens, if you will, of the existence of that glacier after it's been here for over 10,000 years and will no longer be here within a lot of our lifetime. Now, glaciers make up 2/3 of the world's fresh drinking water, and here to get to the toe of the ice, so nowhere near as accessible as the Athabasca Glacier is. So, those 4 friends, thinking they didn't need a guide, they didn't need help from anybody, they were just going to do it on their own, made their way out to that road, the nearest to the Saskatchewan Glacier, being an hour.
Every single day, so it keeps them looking nice and good and young and rejuvenated. Now, as we go along,
Take me back.
unfortunately we can't go up there and this bus will get stuck. Now, as we go along our way, folks, I will share some more stories about the land that we're on. Now, there's a significant 2 people that are the reason why we have tourism here in the first place. Their names are David Douglas and Norman Colley. Now I'll start off with David Douglas, and I'll finish off with Norman Colley. Now, David Douglas was a Scottish botanist and mountaineer in the early 1800s, and he came out here to test both of those skills. Now, on all fronts, he succeeded. He was the first person to ascend 2 mountains, and he proclaimed that there were well over 5,000 meters. Now, he's actually he said that there were around 5,400 meters, which was the Mount Brown that he named. And then he also said one was 5,600 meters, and that was Mount Hook. Now, with that being said, he also found a tree, and he named it promptly after himself as the Douglas fir. Now, Mr. David Douglas was a bit of an interesting specimen, if you will. He was really good at gaslighting. Now, fortunately, those mountains were actually the smallest mountains within the range that he climbed. And they're actually only around 2,000 meters tall. So not even half the original height that he predicted them. But the Douglas fir doesn't just stop there. He couldn't rely on his botany skills. The Douglas fir, in fact, was not a fir tree. It's actually a spruce tree. So it should be named the Douglas spruce tree. So, nonetheless, he was kind of a big screw up, but that led to a golden era of mountaineering out here, that the adventure was plentiful. Now, that led about 100 years later to a guy by the name of Norman Colley that came out here in the late 1800s. Now, he was a pretty smart individual. He was a scientist from the UK as well as a mountaineer. He enlisted the help of the local indigenous people to get to this very beautiful valley that we're in right now. Now, he enlisted the help of the Stoney Nakoda and the Wood Cree people who reside near Jasper. And they took him to this very valley right here. And then he became the first European to ascend 21 beautiful mountains for the very first time and document it as well too. So that means all around us, folks, there's not a mountain that he didn't touch first. Now, if we look to our immediate left, right beside the glacier that folks were just on, there is Mount Athabasca. Mount Athabasca was the first of many that sparked that adventure. Now, he got to the very top of that, and at the time it would have had a sheer vertical overhang of pure ice. Now, that would have been quite wild for the early 1900s and late 1800s, because the mountaineering equipment that they would have had would have been very poor, would have not been up to the task, so it would have been quite difficult to mount that mountain. Now, they got to the very top there, and they laid their eyes upon something quite shocking, and that was, oh Lee, look at that. Right on Mount Snowdon, which is to our immediate left, there was a massive avalanche, probably some ice falling off the very top there. That's pretty cool. You can still see some residual debris. Now, that very mountain was the second mountain that he decided to climb. Unless I go back to the journey. Now, he got to the very top of Mount Athabasca, and he noticed something very interesting once he was up there. A massive, massive sheet of glaciatic ice, about 168 square kilometers large in fact, which would have been absolutely massive. Now, 168 square kilometers roughly translates to 80 square miles. So that is absolutely huge. And that was sparked their next journey. So they came back down and they camped out on the very glacier that you were just on for 3 days, and they decided to get on top of that mountain right in front of us, which is Mount Snowdon. Now it gets its name from the massive chunk of ice that's at the very top that you can kind of just break out. You know what probably caused that huge debris of ice splashing all over the place just moments ago. Now that is in fact the Columbia ice field itself. And that also means that it's the highest point of the ice field on top of that mountain. And it gives that mountain a very interesting classification called a hydrological apex, meaning that there's 3 significant rivers that come off that very mountain. Now the first of many is just off to our left here. And this is the Shinwapta River, and the Shinwapta Lake is just behind it. Now the Shinwapta Lake and River are actually the water source for the Athabasca Falls and the Shinwapta Falls just down the valley here. So that's pretty interesting. And Shinwapta is actually a Stoney Dakota word that means turbulent waters. So it really lives up to that name again, folks. Now, it doesn't just stop there at those waterfalls and cascades. It continues on throughout the entire province of Alberta and goes all the way north to the Arctic Ocean. Now, there's 2 other rivers that come off this very point as well too. That is the North Saskatchewan, which goes all the way east through our beautiful prairie land and then eventually ends up at the Hudson's Bay. And then lastly we have the Columbia that goes all the way west through beautiful British Columbia. Then lastly into Washington State and northern Oregon and out to the Pacific Ocean. Now that also makes that very mountain a triple continental divide, which is extremely rare. And so rare, in fact, for a mountain to have both of those classifications. There is only one other of those in existence. Actually, it's in the same mountain range. It's just south of the border in the States, and it's in the Rocky Mountains as well too, which is pretty interesting and cool that this mountain range has provided so much fresh water all throughout North America. Now, for that reason as well too, I like to call that very spot the heartbeat of Canada. Because if it wasn't for the Columbia ice field being top of it, as well as that mountain, we would lack some serious fresh water all throughout our country. Now, it provides essential fresh water to our agricultural lands to our east, as well as to the boreal forests to our north, and lastly, our hydroelectricity and forestry to our west. So it provides a lot for us here in Canada. Not only that, for the world as well too. Now, the Columbia ice field actually retains about 70 to 60% of the world's drinking water within the ice alone. Now as we go a little bit further down the valley here, folks, you'll see that beautiful Shinwapta River again. And the formation of this river is quite interesting. It doesn't have a defined path and it kind of meanders all throughout the valley here. Now that is quite common within glaciatic environments. That's because the same sediment that is within the water is at its own detriment as well too. It creates blockages and makes the river pick a new path. It kind of resembles a braided hairstyle, so we called it the braided river systems. Now this will eventually become one and join into one river just underneath your feet, about 280 meters below you off the skywalk. Now, that is not the only thing that is going to be beneath you. There also is going to be a high plausibility that there will be some mount goats there. So in 2014, before we made the skywalk bridge here, the mount goat population was suffering quite a lot. Due to erosion within the area at that time, as well as their natural predators, their population numbers were plummeting. Ever since we put this in, it gives them essential coverage and shelter, and their population numbers have actually doubled since then. So it's very well plausible you'll see little white specks beneath you. That could be a mount goat. Now, like I said, it stands a whopping 280 meters above the valley bottom, which is also significant because that is roughly around the same size ice that was just beneath your feet moments ago. It's actually the exact size of ice that was just beneath the steps of the glacier that you were just at moments ago. So it gives you very good perspective on how massive the ice was you were just standing on a few moments ago. Now, there is an unlimited time limit here, folks, so you can stay here as long as you'd like. Of course, they're probably going to frown at you if you start setting up a tent and sleeping there, so don't do that, folks. Now, there's a few options as well too for what you can do here. We have guided tours with one of our lovely Skywalk staff, as well as audio tours available as well too that come in 9 different languages. So if English is not your first language, we have you covered. Now you'll see just to the left here, this is the Skywalk. There's that beautiful glass floor beneath you. And you'll walk down the path that has information about the beautiful valley that we're in, as well as tells you a little bit of the history and why that's there in the first place as well too. Now, that does a natural loop and it spits you out right over here. To our left, there is this shelter here, folks. Now, you will line up right here after you're done on your journey here. You will get picked up by a bus. Now, buses come here every 10 to 30 minutes, roughly every 15 minutes guaranteed there's a bus here. And to do the full Skywalk lap, it usually takes around 45 minutes if you read all the signage posted. So, that's where you're going to get picked up by a bus. You can take any bus you'd like that parks up there and enjoy yourself, folks. It'll take you right back to the Discovery Center. Now, I know I said this last time, but this time it's very well plausible that I may not be your driver on the way back. So please take all personal belongings with you as you exit the vehicle and have a lovely time out there, folks. If I don't see you again, I hope you enjoy your time here in the Canadian Rockies and have safe travels to your next adventure, folks.